So let's go. So I take my first hit, and I'm told to hold it in until I can't hold it in any longer. And once I let it out, it will hit me in a snap. I let it out, and this tension, the feeling similar to when you want to vomit but have nothing left in your stomach. Just that mild vice grip on your gut hits me. Simultaneously, I see lights emerging in the sky, not extreme, more background, as if you just looked at a flashlight then looked away, and you see a little bit of light still shimmering in the air. The faintest shimmering in the sky. I'm looking up at the people, the shamans, singing and fanning me. And they go to attend to the other person. One stays with me. A few minutes pass, and they ask me again, would you like another hit? I sigh, expecting this discomfort in my gut to hit, but I know I have to take it anyway. So I take another hit. A few more minutes pass, I take another, and I feel the urge to take my shirt off. I take it off. The grass feels wonderful. I take my pants off. My underwear is still on. But I feel this urge. For some reason, the urge to take the underwear off too. But no. You can't take your fucking underwear off. This is society. This is civilized people we are. We don't have our dicks out around other people unless we're having sex. The urge hits me. Take it off. Take it off. Take it off. The gut pain's still there. Mild adjustments to my senses. I remember specifically the lights. But aside from that, not much else. So I take, finally, begrudgingly and hesitantly, I am free of the underpants. I am free of my robotic friend, my leg. And I'm just in the grass, and the pain in my gut evaporates. I'm left with this sense of oneness with the earth. I might be remembering this wrong, but if I'm not, the feeling when maybe if you've ever been part of a band and you've started to feel as if all the band is one thing, or if you were playing video games and got so into the zone that you almost felt connected to your opponents and the game, the remote controller, and all that became one thing. In that moment, I felt one with what I can only describe as everything. The God force, perhaps. I'm still very much in my body, but I'm doing acrobatics all over the grass in my hair with my hairy ass and a smile upon my face. And I feel free of unnecessary inhibitions, which it clicked that I was holding on to with so much doubt that taking these underwear off would be worth it. The symbolic underwear, we'll call them. But I took it off, and I felt that anytime I get off of the path and I feel like I'm out of sync with a good life, the goodness, to not worry, it'll be back. It's there eternally. That is the everything. I hugged a tree, stereotypically. Understood that its roots, its age, me and this tree were not very different. This life. These strange rolls on the ground I was doing over my back, movements I haven't done since. this understanding of my proprioception, of my kinesthetic possibilities, so in depth, so happy, so confident that life was good. That a way exists in life to live optimally. And there was a point during this experience where I consciously put the similar restraint on myself that I felt was equivalent to keeping my underwear on. I clenched down and the pain in the gut reemerged. I'm not exactly sure what to make of that. But at the time, it felt like, oh, I'm doing this to myself. I'm taking myself off the path or giving myself this pain, but there's no need to. This was my first and only experience with bufo. Another word for it might be 5-MeO DMT, and yet another term, the God molecule. Disclaimer, I highly recommend doing this around people who are very experienced with this. I don't even want to call it a drug, although I'm sure that's what many people would identify it as, especially in America. But drug feels too dirty, as if the connotation has been so corrupted that it wouldn't give DMT the sacred respect I currently believe it deserves. It's not something to be done tra-la-la with friends, or that's a belief that currently makes sense to me. It was medicine doesn't seem quite the right word for it. It was a touch with something that I do not have words to describe. Except for the ones I just used, which, by the way, sums up but a small fraction of what this experience was really like. And that was all within the course of maybe 15, 20 minutes. Quick side note, I was told beforehand that if I wanted to take my clothes off or scream at the top of my lungs, etc., feel free to do that. That being said, I was still responsible for my actions. And there was, despite this release of inhibition, it seemed an optimal amount of release, because I was still conscious enough to not tumble into the instruments that they had laid out or bother other people while I was doing my acrobatics around this lawn. I'm not sure exactly what to make of that experience. I'm not sure how confident I should be that anything I saw there was real outside of the realm of that specific experience, or just real at all. If it was just purely psychedelic-induced mumbo-jumbo, or if I really touched something divine, and that the God molecule isn't just a nonsensical, overhyped name. Maybe. Maybe I just got really high on the lawn. But I don't think so. I think that's a realm I look forward to seeing scientists explore. The realm of psychedelia. And not just as mushrooms, friends taking drugs in a party, but as something that can be healing, something that can be profoundly wise, a wonderfully useful teacher. I've heard several psychologists say that in their own experience. I'm speaking specifically of Gabor Mate and Jordan Peterson. In taking ayahuasca, there were revelations that were extremely healing, that in Gabor Mate's words were the collection of 20 years of psychotherapy. I'm pretty sure psychotherapy. Forgive me if that specific descriptor is wrong, but essentially therapy for 20 years. It is not for everyone, that's for sure. But for the people who it is for, it's wonderful. And same for DMT, but again, not for everyone. A lot of people have had the experience of getting shot out of their body on enough DMT. I suppose I would simply have to take more. This is a very commonly reported experience with DMT. They leave their mind and they go to a realm where they're surrounded by what is often described as gods or godly beings. And they're given more information than they can hold when they come back, so they only come back with a little sliver of what they experienced. And it's often profound. For some people, it doesn't change a thing about how they live, but for some people, it's truly a life-changing experience. DMT is partly, little lesson here, it is partly the drug that is the chemical released in your mind when you are dreaming that creates such wonderful imagery and sensory experience in your dreams. Feel free to look into it more. It's a very fascinating topic. But going back to something I said a second ago with the screaming, being given the freedom to scream or be naked. There is something so beautiful, wonderful, useful about, or it's seemingly beautiful, wonderful, and useful when it comes to having a place where you can be so raw and perhaps so you can do so many things that as a human you might desire doing but are forced to inhibit for oftentimes reasonable societal rules. Being in a McDonald's screaming my lungs off, or being naked in school or at work, or just singing as loud as you want, or crying, bawling your eyes out, or being angry and cursing whatever you need to curse. There are places where that doesn't seem practical, reasonable. Let's all get into regarding that for now. But the place where you can be vulnerable, you can be weird, embarrassing, in ways that feel amazing and are extremely healing. Having a place to just scream. Catharsis. It's not a concept I understand very deeply, but it's in essence emotional release of a very pent-up emotion that you have stopped from being felt or expressed with your full being. Maybe you felt it inside and had angry thoughts, but you didn't allow your full body and all the things of which you could control. You didn't just let all that express this rage or sadness, to cry with your whole being. And just being naked in grass with the sun touching your skin. Sun touching your skin, very healthy thing. For more than just tanning. Obviously, within certain amounts, right, you can cook yourself to death. Yeah. I miss having that. And I wonder why we don't have it more often. We have rage rooms. And even in a funeral, I feel the urge to inhibit my crying or the deepest expression of my woes that I could express. What comes to mind are some people who don't, and it seems like the right thing to do. Take my words for what they're worth. Even if I were to become an expert in all the topics I'm talking about, there's a quote that goes something along the lines of, every human is a great abbreviator. Experts are wonderful abbreviators. They'll give you an abbreviated, even if you were to absorb all the information they've gathered. The idea being that one individual can ultimately only gain a small fraction of all the knowledge that could be gathered, even in a realm in which they're experts. And although you have some cases where this realm of expertise, there are many experts agreeing on this one thing. This thing has happened many times before. It's a very solidly, concretely understood part of reality. And there are times where it's very useful to agree with experts and believe what they're saying, aside from the fact that one person really can't practically spend their time becoming an expert in very many subjects, just to time and effort constraints and memory what you can even hold. So there is a degree of trust necessary to reap the benefits of expertise from other people. And if you just don't trust them, you don't trust an expert carpenter when you're having a house built and he recommends what sort of ground to not build a foundation on because the house will sink. And I know my shit. I've built tiny houses before. Well, no, this house is specifically different for XYZ factor, and I've seen it happen many times before, and you just won't run into it unless you're building on this specific type of soil. I've built houses before a couple times. I know my stuff. I don't need to listen to you. Well, okay, then your house might sink or tilt. The doctor who knows what sort of fracture you have in your arm and how to heal it. Like, I've gotten dinged up before. I know how to handle it. And even then shit gets weird because you'll hear of someone like Goggins fracturing the ever-loving bejesus out of his shins and feet and still running insanely long amounts of time after that and not having his legs just fall apart and having him reach a point where those injuries wouldn't even hurt him anymore, according to what he said anyway. Expertise. So much of my views of reality have been informed by experts, have been informed by institutions that I haven't questioned very much. And again, a lot of that is useful. Subject change. Talking about how to figure out what is most important in your life, how to figure out what to spend your time on. And I offer two, I'll call them archetypal characters. The one who is the simple person, I'll say. Not in any demeaning way. When I say simple, I mean the very fundamental parts of being a human that will, for many people, offer a high-quality life. Friends, and attending to the problems and beauties of those relationships. Family, same thing, having kids. A career that you like, something solid that can pay the bills. And you're worried very much about that world. And then we'll call them the stereotypical great person. This being, excuse me 1 second. The stereotypical great person. The person like we'll say a Martin Luther King, a Gandhi, a Nelson Mandela. Someone who has their eyes set on this great vision. What does great mean exactly in these contexts? Generally, they're talking about things that impact a lot of people, world-scale problems, we might call them. In modern terms, we might say climate change, potential nuclear war, mental health crises across the world, things like that. And if you were to address those sorts of issues and make a lot of successful changes, useful changes, you're deemed a great person. But how much should the everyday person, or even I'll talk about myself specifically, how much time should be spent focusing on these sorts of issues? Which is interesting to note that many people consider it a good life to focus the vast majority of their time and resources on the first archetypal person I described, the simple person, the normal person, where you're following a very useful, generally true blueprint about what it means to be a human and to live a good life. And to dismiss those things in the name of these greater issues, or not take care of them, right? If you have kids and then start to put all your time and effort into a major world problem, is that right? Is that good? Even if you help millions of people, but you fucked over this one kid who grew up now essentially without a dad who really cared about them, put them as a high priority. Is that right? And maybe a lot of that depends on how big are these problems, how directly are they impacting you, or the things that you really care about. Because notice that me, and I'm sure many, if not all of you, don't spend the majority of your time and resources feeding people who are starving. And if you spend some time helping feed people that are starving, giving people shelter if they have no shelter, or working to stop wars, or working avidly to stop climate change and make bills be passed, or whatever I don't even know what to call it, the stereotypically important things, great things, very important things, and yet it doesn't feel wrong to us to spend, at least for me, a lot of my time focusing on personal interests, people I care about, things I care about, and perhaps that's just an analysis of human nature, or maybe that's very strongly impacted by our culture. I'm not sure, and I've been struggling lately with what I should be focusing on. And recently I have had a mini revelation in the form of my logical, mathematical, traditionally informed self did not have great communication with my more emotional, unknown self. Very rough descriptors. There was the part of me that would love to sing and go out and exercise and play and meet up with friends and have fun times with them and focus on reading and learning about things that fascinate me specifically. And then there's this part of me that says, no, you have a unique opportunity. You don't have kids, this very clear responsibility in front of you that you're probably a horrible person if you don't attend to, or a family member who's very sick I have to take care of, or hungry. You don't have that. And I have the money saved up for this trip at the moment, so that's not a great worry either. And so here I am, this person with ample amounts of free time on my hands, but I am struck with the many issues going on in the day. And at times I've felt a deep guilt if I'm not putting large and maybe the vast majority of my time towards informing myself about those topics and problems, trying to perhaps help them in some way. And recently I had a discussion with myself, very open and honest about, okay, let's say, where the fuck was I? All right. Attempting to figure out where one should put their priorities when we have such great access to wells of information telling us about the worst problems going on in the day. And perhaps even of all time, that part could be debated. But I heard Steven Pinker say the other day that it's a bit of a trick to, if I gather all the worst pieces of information going on in the world at any point in time, it will always seem as if the world is falling apart and that catastrophic things are happening that you should constantly be focusing on. But there's a weird dissonance between that and just going outside and looking at the world, walking around the world, interacting with people, speaking with people. There is a much less catastrophic feeling in the air, which admittedly is weird to pair with what my dad said about living through the Cuban Missile Crisis, because he said the day where it was at its peak, people were still going about their day as if it was essentially a normal day, even though the world was on the brink of nuclear annihilation. So I digress to what I said earlier, having the conversation with myself, figuring out how do I want to spend tomorrow if I'm speaking purely emotionally. And I went through the list I won't bore you with, but a lot of it was not focusing on these major problems. There was some amount of myself that wants to put some time into it, especially since I am on a platform where I will be more often than most people speaking about these topics. And that makes a good bit of sense to me. But to do nothing but obsess over these problems, maybe I'll regret it when I get older, but at the moment, it does not seem the way to go. All right, moving on. This. Hold on one moment. This is a very interesting quote. I will set the scene. A group of escapees from what are essentially prison camps, slave camps, but they are camps in which you don't know you are a slave or a prisoner, that you're eventually going to be fed to some other being. You're being raised essentially like free-range cattle, where, they're killed, quote-unquote, humanely, and they live a good life, by the standards set by the people who kill and eat them, which is a weird topic. But imagine a group of those people. They find out what sort of situation they're in. They escape. They get away. And they begin building a resistance against this system that insists on raising and abusing these sorts of people. And they reach a point where the leader of this group finds it the most reasonable option and the safest option for the people he cares about to commit a genocide against their opposing force. One of his best friends, however, who has lived a bit more in this world, has seen its similarities to their own community. This person has even made some friends with people on this side of the aisle. And the quote, as they're having a discussion, this person reveals that they do not want to go down the route of genocide. They want to find some other way. They reach a fever pitch in the conversation in which the person says, "You're only right in terms of probability." You're only right in terms of probability. You're only right based on the information we have at hand now. Also, even though maybe this way would save the most of the people we care about, if I took part in something that killed these friends I have, I don't think I'd be able to smile anymore. And this person who's saying these things, they're the sort of Winnie Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, Uncle Iroh-esque character. They're not the strongest in the bunch, although they may have their strengths. The smartest in the bunch, though they're not stupid. But they have a sort of wisdom, emotional intelligence. And excuse the occasional voice cracks. I'm trying out different ways of speaking that accommodate long form speaking. Anywho, they are that sort of person, the most perhaps morally intelligent person. The person who is a genius of being good. And they have this other route, this other option, this incredibly dangerous route. Puts themselves and whoever joins them at great risk. And there's a much smaller probability that it will succeed. But if it succeeds, it can then solve the big problems without genocides and perhaps without even war. And ultimately, these two people agree to, okay, I'm going to go do my mission, but if I don't come back in time, because they're on a very pressed time limit, then you keep going about your plan of genocide, and I will go do my thing and try to get back to you before you complete it. And so they both go their separate ways to sort of agree to disagree. But sticking with that quote for a moment, you're only right in terms of probability. This seems like such a profound quote. I was listening to a discussion by a man called Dan Carlin, wonderful podcast called Hardcore History. If you are fascinated in the more hardcore moments within history, great tragedies, wars, catastrophes, he's the man to explain it in some of the most interesting ways around. And he's describing the Cuban Missile Crisis, the build-up to it. He's talking about the conversations had in the room with Kennedy and his advisors about what to do next. And if I remember correctly, this group was built up of generals, Kennedy, and what you might call the Spock character, the very mathematically inclined, emphasizing the importance of reason and logic sort of character. And he was asking the audience, and also as a thought experiment to himself, what kind of person would you want in that room making those decisions? Do you want those sorts of people? A Spock-esque character, a very military-oriented, strategic person? Or would you want a Gandhi sort of character? The Martin Luther King, the stereotypical moral genius, let's say. Who do you want making that decision and why? And something I'll say about emotions for a moment is I've had them described to me by psychologists that emotions... Hold on, let me back up for a second. There's the realm of the strictly known. This would be 1 + 1 = 2 sort of shit. You know? You put fire to wood, it burns. That sort of thing. The very traditionally understood, it's been tested many times in many different ways. This is the solidly known parts of reality. And then you go outside of that realm and you have the partially known sides of reality. This is the muse that comes to the artist, and we're not really sure where this muse comes from. It comes from the great unknown. and yet they dance with it in a sort of way. And even you can tell by my change up in lingo, they dance with it. What the fuck does it mean to dance with the unknown? What the fuck are you talking about? Well, this somehow, some way seems the appropriate sort of vocabulary to take on when describing this. They dance with it. And they find a way to harmonize and listen and become maybe a conductor? No. Conducer? No. Conduit, yes. A conduit for this muse, this inspiration. And they can refine it into a song, a poem, something along those lines. And that's the realm of the kind of known. It works, sort of, and we kind of understand it. Well, not even works. Sort of. There are times where it's worked incredibly. Where some of the best music you've ever heard has come from that sort of experience. And then outside of that realm is the totally unknown. This is the kind of thing you do not even know. You do not know. And when you are talking about a Cuban Missile Crisis, I imagine, so take that for what it's worth. This is my imagination. This is my guesses about this thing. And keep in mind, folks, at the bottom of the scale of scientific evidence that is most reliable, at the bottom of that triangle, and you can look that up for yourself. You go on Google, type in the images, the pyramid of scientific truth or scientific evidence. And near the bottom of that is expert opinion. Opinion specifically. And then when you get more to the top of that, there is experiments done by groups of scientists in which they are analyzing many different sorts of experiments that follow very strict criteria. And they're trying to find commonalities within a collection of very rigorously done experiments. Rigorous in the sense of they're making very damn sure they're following the set of rules, and these rules are designed to extract a certain sort of truth, an objective truth. And near the bottom of that list, again, is expert opinion. And I'm no expert in this, and this is my opinion. So take this as maybe a food for playing with, the food for playing with in the realm of thought. This is a playground of ideas that I'm currently engaging in, exploring things. So, moving on. In that realm of deciding, in the room where you're deciding, do we go to nuclear war or not? I imagine there's a lot of unknowns at play there. Very unknowns. We don't know whether they're serious, if they're actually going to cross this line in the sand that we say if you cross, we are engaging in war. War begins when you cross this line. Will they do that? I don't know. Are they bluffing? I don't know. Will they launch nukes at literally any moment in this buildup? I don't know. Should we launch nukes right now while we're waiting? I don't know. What are they going to do? What should we do? What's the right thing to do? And I can almost guarantee no one wanted to be the person that presses the switch. And I'm talking about, I believe it was Gorbachev at the time in the USSR and Kennedy. Neither of them wanted to press the switch, as evidenced by they didn't press it. Maybe they wanted to and someone held them back. I don't know. Interestingly enough, many of the generals were recommending they nuke now, at least in Kennedy's room, like nuke now. By the way, he has recordings of many of these conversations that he secretly recorded and then shared with the public. Nuke now, it'll be the safest option. These Spock characters are trying to create equations to figure out what is the probability that they'll nuke us? What is the probability that if we nuke them, how many people will die, most likely in the outcome? What will be all the after effects of that? But how can you perform a very precise mathematical equation when there are so many unknown variables? and extremely important unknown variables. Maybe I'm just not so mathematically inclined, which I'm not. So maybe there are many things I don't understand about how precise you can get with that equation. And so on that note, I guess I would like a Spock character and a Winnie the Pooh character. Someone who's very in touch with, they have a genius moral compass. I don't know a better way to say it than that. They're the Buddha, they're the Jesus, essentially. And there's an idea that the Buddha and Jesus are all representations of our truest self, our best self, and that the potential of any given human being stems, or the potential for any human being, on one end there's a Jesus, a Buddha, a Muhammad, the best sort of person. On the other end of that spectrum is a Satan. And every human has the potential to go on to either sides of that spectrum. That being said, perhaps some people have a sort of moral genius. They can reach the heights of a Michael Jordan equivalent in the realm of being a good person. Which is interesting considering how much Michael Jordan was not inherently gifted, according to him not getting on his high school basketball team, but rather gifted in the sense of he was maybe a genius of hard work would be the way to say it. He wanted it so fucking badly. He just did nothing but that. And because of that, he became a master of masters. Morality. When I went and experienced the people who for the first time in my life I would call a shaman, I never met anyone like that before. Not that I can remember. There was... How do I even put it into words? When they were speaking specifically about the matters of wisdom, deep truths about what it means to be a human, and not just human in the sense of biology and psychology, but human in the sense of we're these creatures that we don't know where we came from. We don't know what happens after we die. And we're not all too sure about why we're here, what we should be doing while we're here. We have some answers to those questions, but there's a lot of mystery in regard to those questions, and they seem to have an understanding that I've not seen in professors about why we're here, what to do with their lives. An intuitive understanding about it. And that comes with all the unknowns of emotional truths. That being said, it felt like we're missing the shaman, the connector to the spirit world, spirits, drinks, alcohol, shots. They're also called spirits at time because, this is an explanation I've heard, if you were to get very drunk on liquor, which is essentially quite easy, it's as though you are possessed by a different spirit. Spirits. I have heard someone describe humans as a collection of subpersonalities. That, if I remember correctly, this is largely a Freudian understanding. Or maybe he was the one who first formalized it or talked about it and made it popularized. Subpersonalities with many different desires that are often conflicting. You have your anger from time to time. That wants one thing. But you also have the spirit of civility within you. So maybe I'll use the classic example. Someone cuts you off on the road. There's that rageful spirit that might rise up within you that wants to scream at them, yell at them. If they're behind you and they're riding your ass, maybe you want to hit the brakes. But then there's the spirit of civility that understands why that's not a good option societally. Then there's the spirit of goodness that might pop up as well. No, maybe they're just having a rough day. Maybe their wife is pregnant and giving birth and they're just trying to rush past, something along those lines. Maybe they're just a new driver. They're not very good. And even if they're just an asshole who's riding her ass, they're still a person. They still have kids and potentially, and they definitely have parents. And probably have people who care about them. So is this really a reason to maybe kill them? And then they have the angry spirit. No, I don't give a fuck. Hit the brake. And so all these spirits are within us, bouncing around with their own desires. I've heard it described when you have an addiction, we'll say. And this is not just applied to addiction, but this is a good example to paint the picture. This addiction has its own thoughts that come along with it, its own emotions, its own rationalities, its own weight of will, right? The potential for it to take over and pull you towards something. It has an amount of force over what you do. And also when you have, let's say, you're trying to stop eating fast food, you're addicted to fast food, but you drive past McDonald's. Well, that spirit is awoken when the sensory input comes in of you smell the fried food, you see that nice shining yellow arch, those nice shining yellow arches. And the spirit understands that when I see those, when I smell this, what is soon to follow is this wonderful, delicious consumption of patties and fries and salt and fat and sugar. Ooh-wee. And it may start rationalizing in your head. The thoughts might come along with that. Well, I haven't eaten fast food in a few days, and I did go for a walk earlier today. So maybe you go do that. And afterwards, when someone asks you that you told you were going to be on a better diet, like, oh, how are you keeping up with your diet? Maybe you feel the compulsion to lie. That's also a part of that spirit. And that does not just apply to addiction, of course. That could apply to a loved one. When you see them, this is the spirit of warmth that comes out of me. I want to give them a hug, know how they're doing. If they have a problem, I'd like to maybe help them in some way. And so a shaman being a spirit guide, a communicator with the realm of spirits, with all the personalities within you. I've heard psychologists be described as the modern day shaman, the modern day, priest you can go to with your problems, and they'll recommend what you do to thrive, roughly speaking. But the realm of science at the moment does not seem great at measuring does not seem to me to be great at measuring I don't really know where that sentence was going. A disconnect. I'm trying to put into words this disconnect I've seen between religion and science. That science, as I've said before, it sort of kneecapped religion in many ways, because now it's starting to test these passages that for the longest time have been truth, literal truth. But now we have samplings of core samplings from trees. We have what's the way we can measure different types of rocks, layers in the Earth's crust to figure out how old they are. We can essentially do the same thing that autopsies can do with people. There are clocks that go off on a person after they die, rough clocks that say, oh, okay, when this part starts to inflate, or gas starts to come from this area, or the eyes start to do XYZ, well, it shows that this amount of time has passed because it happens this amount of time after they die, yada, yada, yada. And you can see that happen in some equivalents with different parts of the Earth. And through studying that, you find out, oh, the Earth is actually much older than it says in the Bible. And you can apply, I won't go into all of them that I know at the moment, but there are many different examples where you apply science. This, by the way, a dictum that seems very important in Christianity, I'll say, for example, because that's been the major one I've grown up with. The emphasis on truth, knowing truth, understanding truth. And then science comes in and seems like a much better tool for learning what is true. And you apply that to religion and you begin to find out a lot of the things in those religious texts are not true. So then how much of it should I believe in? How much of it should I follow? And that being said, there still seem to be a lot of truths within many religions that help people thrive, that help people to not go into a hell, even a hell on earth, to live a horrible life. To give an example, the Sodom and Gomorrah. There are many descriptors of those two cities at the time that would ruin a state, would ruin a society, would make them collapse. And you could call that collapsing if you don't follow this set of rules. Not that they got all of them right, but if you don't follow a certain set of rules, your society collapses. I mean, obviously. And you can call that God smiting down your society. That would make a lot of sense. And so there is that element to religion. And I wonder how much truth exists in religion that we don't have ways to measure yet in science. In the spirit world, emotions I've heard described as a good tool for exploring the partially known, as I described earlier. They're a quote, lower resolution, and there's some utility to this description, I'm not saying it's totally true, but lower resolution way to view reality as opposed to the precision of math. Anywho, so perhaps a spirit guide being an emotional guide, understanding what certain emotions lead to, certain paths in life lead to, how to heal certain emotional pains. That's roughly all I have to say about that matter for now. More food for thought for sure. If you measure a fish's intelligence by how well it can climb a tree, you will forever think of the fish as stupid, and the fish very well might find itself to be stupid if it listens and is influenced by your judgments. And you will forever be frustrated. But if you put a fish into the water, you find its genius. There's an interesting idea in a lot of literature, specifically fictional, that we have our own personal genius, our own personal genie, our own personal guardian angel, maybe even. And allow me to speak freely for a moment, so I will remove myself from the constraints of trying to be deeply literal. And that might be laughable for some of you having listened up to this point, but I will free myself up a bit. Coming with that will probably be more errors, more absolutist statements, but I will be speaking practically, not literally. The idea that we all have a genie. I've noticed in myself a genie in the form of stick fighting. Rewind to me as a teenager with some great friends in the woods, and we're in the middle of a stick fight. Common practice, a common pastime that we had back in the day. But on this day, it's different. On this day, we are speeding up. We have very tough sticks that we have found on this day, and we are using them to their full potential. We are swinging damn near 100% speed we have built up to this point, And when we hit our fastest, the image passes through my mind of the Street Fighter character, the main character, I think, Ryu. And in the show or the comic, he has a form he gets into, and he passes through two phases. It's the stereotypical thing in at least anime, where you have your first phase of power, and this is the raw, animalistic, you're kind of going berserk phase, where you're blasting through people with the utmost emotional intensity and ferocity. And then elevated above this stage is the calm, absolutely powerful character. The one that it seems calm, at peace almost in this great fire. And that image of that evolution in the character passed through my head. And I thought to embody this character. And so I believe that I would and could and was doing my best to embody this character. And time slowed down. This is not a phenomenon that only I have experienced or discovered. There's a word for it in science. I forget the name. But think about it in the following sense. You begin to take in more frames per second of time. You absorb more. And because you're having so much data packed into your head, somehow, some magical way, you perceive time to be slowed down. Very strange, but true. And for several seconds of stick fighting, I saw both my friend and I in slow motion. It was like a superpower. And I could not yet move fast enough. In that experience, I came in touch with my genie. And perhaps in one other instance of conversation, well, one other sort of instance in which I've had conversations with people where I feel extremely absorbed into them, into what they're saying. I'm listening oftentimes when I have this experience, and things around them, even if I'm sober, begin to take on a psychedelic quality. To kind of, the color, it's like it changes. It's like a filter is put over the world where it begins to almost wobble. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. And the color becomes maybe just a touch more vivid. And I'm locked in on them. And I wonder if you have came in touch with your genie. It doesn't have to be anything like I've said. You could be a very different animal. I could be a fish, and you might be a squirrel. So when I describe my experiences, you aren't specifically relating to them because you're wonderful at climbing trees, and I suck. And this is a wonderful TED Talk. A TED Talk called How We Suppress Genius and Create Learning Disability. Scott Sonnen. And this man paints a beautiful picture of the incredible amount of potential we are not tapping into in our education system specifically. That he was described as, I think, having ADHD and maybe some other learning disabilities. But either there were different styles of teaching that he could learn just as fast, if not faster, than the other students if these were implemented, or that he was specifically, in his sort of description, he's made to do other things. He's made to be a master of other things. I imagine the talk is some collection of these two things. From my memory, that is the gist of it. And I go to another thing as I'm beginning to realize, I'm not a detail-oriented rememberer. I seem to remember much more the gist of things, generalities, so keep that in mind when I'm talking. I think you might get more out of what I'm saying. For specific sharp details, probably go listen to other people. Anywho. Naval Ravikant, a man specializing in entrepreneurship, investing, life advice, and certain types of technology. The sort of stereotypical collection of those, what are, in my opinion, quite wonderful factors. And he's an extremely beautifully articulate person. The advice in my life personally has been very useful. One of his pieces of advice being, he focuses on if you are to start your own business, but this can apply to many things in your life. Find the things that you are very passionate about. So I would describe these as things you love doing. Find things you are naturally good at. These might be more the natural genius, although they might be intermingled. I think of Michael Jordan in that instance, where it doesn't seem natural so much as he worked to a point at which he developed a genius or an understanding of this subject that far surpassed many people that were probably naturally gifted at it. Strange, but stick with me here. These are useful descriptors. And the other subject was, I believe, being interested in. And that seemed to lean more towards necessities of your day, things that really needed. Oh, no. Oh, fuck yeah. Thank God. I think I remembered it more specifically. Details. The detail being things that people are missing at this moment. A niche not being filled. What are people craving, desiring at this moment? So your natural gifts, things you're very passionate about, and these voids that are trying to get filled, that people would love to have filled. And if you can create a list of things that apply to you on these three subjects, and you combine that with talking to people who have known you throughout your life, asking them, in your view of me, what do you think I've been naturally good at? What do you think I've been very passionate about? And maybe even what voids do you think need to get filled? And then, of course, you ask yourself those same questions and you compile this list. And if you can find things that are on all three of the lists and sync together, you're in for a powerful combination. Likelihood of success in the economic and joyous realm seem to go up if you can connect those. And even just connecting two of them, maybe even one, useful. Books spread ideas, and ideas made people harder to control. They also allow anyone who can master literacy to interpret rules, laws, religions, etc., instead of just having an official few people do that. Quote from a book, Why Nations Fail. Speaking about what a tyranny would be resistant to and why. Tyranny, control, trying to puppeteer and control you, in a sense. Learning what controls us. I don't want to get you too freaked out by the way I'm thinking about this, but seriously, there does seem to be many things that can control a person that you might not know about. For example, biases. If you don't know that something like confirmation bias exists, you might not be as likely to question your beliefs. Confirmation bias. To define that concretely, let us Google it. When you the tendency to process information by looking for or interpreting information that is consistent with one's existing beliefs. When you understand something like that, you might begin to, for example, promote realms of debate realms in which you can meet people who have very conflicting views of what reality is. Because reality is not just this clear-cut thing we exist in. There are many lenses we place over that reality while interpreting it, while figuring out what to do within it. Our senses are not perfect analyzers of what is. There are many things we don't know and many places in which we fill in the blanks with our imagination, with our guesses, with traditional understandings, with expert opinion, etc., with experiential information. And many of those, in fact, all of those are not 100% identifiers of what is true. So I think it would behoove people, certainly myself. I don't want to turn into a finger wagger. It seems very useful to be open to questioning truth. And I've noticed so many people nowadays, at least in the circles I've been in, when it comes to hot issues, whether that could be abortion, gun rights, politics, in topics that have been imbued with strong emotions. Going back to what I said earlier about spirits, emotions being spirits, strong spirits. These spirits that have their own desires, rationalities, etc. And that they are not necessarily right in what they want and think. That being said, does not mean they do not want and think them with force. But to understand something like confirmation bias exists seems to open up a realm of ideas in the form of conversation, respectful conversation, where you allow people to speak and try to blank slate your mind. Try to start from first principles. Try to see the world through their eyes, not through your eyes, looking through their eyes. So, you have like two sets of filters on the world you're seeing. But to try to remove your filter for a moment, knowing that you have a filter at all. Education. But moving away from the more specific forms of education, just ideas in general. An idea, a precursor to action. An idea, Martin Luther King's dream. I have a fucking dream that little black boys and little black girls, or little white girls and little, you know what I'm talking about, can hold hands and walk down the street as friends. An idea. Being able to form that idea and share that. One of the biggest forms of mind control used in North Korea, or certainly an effective one, is having to inform on people weekly. Have a journal of all the things you see people do that are not following the rules. This restricts what you are willing to do and think about, because now you know every single fucking person is forced to identify problems in the system. There is very much an evil eye of Sauron watching you pretty constantly. People, and you don't know who's going to tell you and who's not. But you know the things you're not allowed to say sometimes. Well, you know a lot of things you're not allowed to say. And as I found, when you don't allow yourself to say things and you have no places where you can speak with people or even think loud about them or write them down because of fear someone might take it, the odds go down that you're going to be sitting there and thinking about those things during your life at all. You're going to censor your own thoughts. That spirit, the spirit we were talking about, the spirit I was talking about, has a desire. And that is the spirit, in this case, of fear. The spirit of tyranny that is existing within you and telling you not to say those things, not to believe those things, act them out, even fucking think about them. For fear that someone may even be reading your fucking thoughts. That no, if I even think about them, maybe I'm more likely to act on them. Those are just bad thoughts. Those are just thoughts that equal fear and danger and death oftentimes. So that can really show how important an idea, just an idea, is. Much less all the things that go along with it, acting it out and sharing it. Martin Luther King's I have a dream, I have an idea, which doesn't sound as passionate, but it's the same essence, I think. I've noticed in myself a censorship of certain thoughts and ideas. Cancel culture. Specifics are conveniently evading me at this moment. So I'll go to a more personal realm. This is so fucking theatrical, but I'm looking up at a moon. I feel like I have something pent up inside me, but I can't quite tell what. And I begin to think thoughts and say things. A catharsis starts to happen. I'm opening up and listening to these spirits that are within me, these emotions, these ideas. And some of them are angry. Some of them are screaming at God, even at myself. But no. I censor myself. No, I'm not. Those are bad things to think about. Those are things I'm not allowed to think about. To even think about them is to poison my mind, much like poisoning an immune system, much like eating bad food. Those thoughts are the bad food equivalent. Don't even think them. But I reach a point where I realize somehow this would be that partially known part of the universe informing me that I'm trusting enough to listen to and to act out, if only for a few moments. I say, fuck that. I do not want to censor myself. I don't even know if I'm right. Why am I trusting these censors that I'm placing on myself and what I'm not allowed to think and do? Because something feels right about expressing these thoughts. There's a part of me that wants to get them out, to say them, to just think about them, and not just quick blocks of a few words, to really elaborate on these ideas, understand them. Oh. And so I did. I released those filters, and I began to dig into parts of myself that were angry at myself, screaming this out to the world, angry at myself, even angry at God. And I almost choked up on saying that because that seems wrong. Like I shouldn't. I'm afraid of being a Cain to an Abel to curse God. But there's a part of me that did. And to pretend like that part of me didn't exist, or to try and not let that part exist any more than it already was, didn't seem useful. And it's interesting, I think, because that experience exposes a potential for ideas, thoughts, feelings that I once thought were awful, were the worst of sins. That it's okay to feel that, to think about that. Now, maybe there's a way in which it's not at a certain context, but context is so fucking important. And to just overlay that rule onto any times, no, there was a time where I wanted to curse God because that was inside of me. There was an anger and a rage and at myself that was there and clearly had some influence over what I did and thought simply through its existing. And just because you allow it to speak doesn't mean it's right. Just because you allow yourself to feel what it feels doesn't mean you're going to be overwhelmed by it. And even if you are, maybe there are times in which that's right. I don't know. But to act as if I do, to think as if I do, to censor as if I do, that seems dangerous, foolish. Like there is a lot of useful info within that, I'll call it the shadow, that I would benefit from speaking with.